Hey folks, Eddie from Totally Wired Guitars here, and after a long wait and many requests, today I'm finally going to be doing my ultimate Jazzmaster setup guide. I've got a number of Jazzmasters here as examples, but we're mostly going to be focusing on this here, my customized charcoal frost metallic American Vintage 266 Jazzmaster, and the main focus of today's video is going to be setting this up around a Mustang-style bridge. This one here is a stay trem 7 1/4 radius bridge. So the focus of today's video is to be able to dial in a basic setup on any new or used Jazzmaster that you may get. It doesn't really matter what kind of Jazzmaster, whether it's a Fender or a Squier or even a clone or copy brand like the Foles Jazzmaster that I had covered a few weeks ago, which I really love. And I also made sure that today we are going to be focusing on accomplishing this using basic tools or inexpensive tools that you can acquire or that maybe you already have around the house. So to follow along with today's video, there are just a couple of things that you're going to need. First, you're going to need a screwdriver. I have a ratcheting screwdriver here. I find them a lot easier to use. I also, in addition to that, like to have a power drill nearby, hopefully one that has a variable torque setting on it like this. You're also going to need whatever Allen keys or hex wrenches came with the bridge that you have on your Jazzmaster. It's also a good idea to have a string action gauge. So today we are going to be using the one that I have here from Fret Guru, the Fret Guru XT. This is actually also a fret rocker, which we're going to be getting into a bit later to check to see if you have high frets, and maybe that's what's causing some of the buzz you're experiencing. I also like to typically have 2 capos on hand, and especially if you have one of these Jazzmasters where the truss rod adjustment is at the heel, you might not be able to nail the setting right off the bat. So it's very handy to have these to put on, and I'll show you how I use them to make those adjustments on the truss rod. I also do have another Jazzmaster back there that has the truss rod adjustment at the headstock, so we're going to be going over that. You'll probably want a new set of strings if you're going to be changing strings. We're going to be doing that on this Jazzmaster, and for that we've got the Gabriel Tenorio Artist Series strings. These are a set of 10 to 46 gauge strings, and they are silk wrapped at the winds up to the ball ends to reinforce and also kind of tame down some of the behind the bridge like ghost notes and kind of sympathetic vibrations. In case you don't like those things. You're going to want to have something to lubricate your nut. So here I have the Music Nomad Tune It. If you have a bridge that has a lot of moving parts or does not have like reinforced posts like this stay trem does with the nylon bushings at the bottom of the post, then likely you're also going to want to have a bottle or a tube of Loctite 222. This is the purple variant. It is the low strength variant, and especially if you are a beginner or new to using Loctite, this is the kind that I recommend you get. For the vibrato arm, especially if it feels stiff or you're getting squeaks, it's good to just have a general lubricant. So I just have the tube of Vaseline here, which I feel like I've had for probably as long as I've been doing Totally Wired Guitars, which started back in 2010. Having a spanner as well in case you need to tighten the nuts for your tuners or anything like that. And in addition to the full-size screwdriver, I usually have, for pick guard screws and stuff like that, just this small tech screwdriver like this one here from StewMac. You're going to need some wire cutters to cut the strings, some kind of string winder, whether it's this or the kind that attach to your drill. This is just one of the cheap Dunlop ones. If you have a variable radius on your bridge, you are going to need a radius gauge, either an over the string radius gauge or an under the string radius gauge like this one. Both of these can be had for not too expensive on Amazon or Reverb or eBay or whatever. This will definitely be necessary if you have like an original threaded saddle Jazzmaster bridge or a Mastery or a Hallen or any kind where the radius on the saddles is adjustable. If you do not have like fancy digital gauges like the ones for neck relief and for nut slot depth like you can get from StewMac, then definitely at least have a set of feeler gauges. These ones are the extra long ones that come from StewMac, but you do not need to spend an exorbitant amount of money on feeler gauges. You can get them for like as cheap as I think like $5 or $10 on Amazon. And then lastly, you definitely are going to need a tuner. But if you want the most precise tuner to dial in your intonation, you're going to want something like a Peterson Strobo Stomp or even a Peterson Strobo Clip like this one here, which I use quite a bit more than the pedal tuner because I find that it's just as accurate and just way more convenient to use. So, but if all you have is your clip-on tuner or your Boss pedal tuner or whatever kind of pedal tuner you have, then that should be close enough to get you into the ballpark when it comes to intonation. We just want to be able to dial in this Jazzmaster with low action, hopefully not buzzing at all on the strings. And I'm also going to be covering just some basic things to watch out for and reasons behind why you are running into some of the most common issues that folks do with a Jazzmaster. So without further ado, let's go ahead and switch over to our bench cam and get started. All right, so as I had mentioned prior, we are going to be using the Gabriel Tenorio String Company Artist Series strings. Shout out to Gabriel for sending these strings over. These are awesome, awesome strings. One of my favorite, if not my favorite, Jazzmaster strings out there. In case you're not familiar with Gabriel Tenorio, dude actually hand makes these strings out in California. I'm not quite sure what exactly that entails, but I have seen some videos of him sitting behind some machinery and quite literally winding these things by hand. These are true round core nickel strings. They have extra long winds at the ball ends and make specific sets depending on whether you are putting them on a Jazzmaster or a Jaguar. And he also makes Mustang specific strings as well as Bass 6 strings. So yeah, definitely check him out if you end up digging how these strings look and sound in this video. So the very first thing that we're going to do is take off the old strings. Okay, so we're just going to take off the old strings here. And I am not the kind that likes to just cut strings under full tension personally. I feel like it takes a special kind of psychopath to do it that way. But, you know, whatever floats your boat. Once they are off is when I will cut the strings and then pull them out of the vibrato. So I'm just going to go ahead and just clip these, maybe 2 at a time or 3 at a time. And then from there, we're just going to pull them out of the vibrato unit here. Now, one thing that I do like to do if you don't have special strings that have reinforced ends already is typically with those strings, I will just solder the winds to the ball ends of those strings. So if you're just using D'Addario or Ernie balls or whatever, that is something that I typically do. There are some sets out there already that have reinforced winds and ball ends that you can buy virtually from all brands. But yeah, the Gabriel Tenorio strings are some of my favorite to use. And they look like this. I just typically will clean off the headstock before I start putting on new strings. And at this time, it's usually a good idea to clean out your nut slots, especially if there's some gunk in there or maybe old lubricant or whatever, because we're going to apply some fresh. And I'm just using some twine here. That's usually what I use to clean out a nut slot. And you will just do it dental floss style in the slots to clean out any gunk that might have been in there. This is also, if you feel like cleaning off your fretboard, a good time to do that. right? Get the gunk off of there that has built up. So I'm just spraying some of this. This guitar has not been played heavily enough for me to get a ton of gunk on here. If anything, there's some dust. Definitely does not merit me using any kind of razor blade or anything here. Okay. And actually, I'm going to move the bench away from the camera so it's not rocking like that. And also, if you want to lubricate or oil your fretboard, this is the time to do it before your strings actually go on. Now, I'm using Dr. Duck's Axe Wax here. I'm about to run out of this stuff. I just put like a little dot on each fret, and then I just rub that oil into the fretboard here. Now, you do not want to leave this stuff on for too long. As soon as I get it on the neck and also kind of the edge as well of the fretboard, then I immediately wipe it off. And that's all you need. You do not need it to sink into the fretboard. If anything, especially if you went heavy-handed with this stuff, that stuff can get under your frets, potentially make the wood swell, potentially push some of the frets out. So yeah, definitely do not leave that on to pool thinking that it's somehow going to enrich your fretboard anymore. All right, so this is very simple. You just line that first string, in this case, the red string, through here. And then we just want to pull this taut. And this is going to be the same process for the E, A, and D string. You're just going to pull the string 2 posts away. So because we're installing on the E, this goes up until the D, and then we cut. Okay. And then from there, here we go. And same is going to go for the A, you're going to cut at the G. For the D, you're going to cut at the B. Okay? And we'll come back when we're stringing up the G, because that one is slightly different. Now, for the G, it's a bit different because we are going to pinch at the G post, pull that back to the low E post. I would cut just at the very, very end here. Just like that. And then usually the B and E, you don't cut at all. Okay, sometimes even with some string brands, especially the high E, can seem a little too short. But that is basically all there is to stringing. What I'll do from here is to tune the guitar up, and the next thing that we are going to do is find the most comfortable height that we can for setting the action overall. And remember, the action is not only determined by the bridge height, it's also going to be related to the neck relief as well. So we're going to be covering both of those things next. So first, let's tune this bad boy up. I said before that we were going to next be adjusting our bridge, but I did want to first bring something to your attention, and that is if your bridge is already decked, right, but your action is still high. And when I say decked, I mean that the base of the bridge is flush or flat against the pick guard, right? It's as low as it can go, and your action still feels high, right? And by high, I would say definitely in excess of, 3 millimeters at the 12th fret. If your strings are still high, then that most likely means that your neck pocket is flat, and you will most likely need a shim. Some folks like to go out because they're really scared of getting ski jump, which I have debunked in a previous video, but you can go out and get these Stumac full pocket neck shims. They come in 0.25 degrees, 0.5 degrees, and a full 1 degree. In my experience, these 1 degree shims are the ones that kind of kill the overall acoustic resonance and liveliness of these guitars, which is why I personally am not a fan of these. I do it the old Fender way. In case you don't know, back in the day, Fender used these like fiberboard inner pocket or short shims just in the innermost part of the neck pocket here. Now I replicate that just using cardstock. So as you can see here, this is 2 layers of cardstock, and I actually just cut these from these Fender labels and then save these for the future because they end up coming in handy, and it's one way to kind of recycle those. These result in approximately 0.5 degrees of pitchback on the neck pocket there. So you may need to use only one on yours. You may need to use four, like I recently had to on an MJT Jazzmaster body. So it really is going to depend on what you need for your bridge to be sitting at an appropriate height. Now for me, the sweet spot on a Mustang-style bridge like this stay trem is usually in the 2.5 to 3.5 millimeter range, right? And I know for a fact that on this American Vintage 266 reissue Jazzmaster that the neck pockets on these are already angled. So I already know that my neck is sitting at an appropriate angle for me to be able to achieve that kind of height on the bridge. Because for a Mustang bridge where the saddle slots are not very deep, like you will find on, say, a Mastery bridge, right? Then you want this bridge to have a bit of height so that you have a bit more break angle and so that the string tightness is enough so that you don't end up knocking your strings out of the saddle slots when you play harder, okay? If you personally like it higher, that's totally cool. Some of those made in Japan traditional 60s Jazzmasters, for example, have maybe a little bit more than 1 degree sometimes for their pre-angled neck pockets. And some of those bridges I've seen are sitting above 4 millimeters from the factory. And that is totally okay. But if you feel like the string tightness when the bridge is that high is just too much, you may actually need to employ a reverse shim. Let me just quickly show you what that looks like. So for this demonstration, I'm just going to be showing you using an MJT Jazzmaster body that I've got here. Normally, when you are shimming a neck, because your bridge decked still results in an action that is too high, you most likely will want to put that shim in the innermost part of the neck pocket here. Now, if like that example that I just shared with you, your guitar already has a pre-angled neck pocket and your bridge is having to sit too high to not fret out like with those MIJ traditional 60s Jazzmasters, then you will want to employ a reverse shim. And a reverse shim is basically cutting out a shim that will be in the backmost part of the neck pocket. And what that does is rather than tilt this way, right, the neck will then straighten out a bit, giving you the ability to lower your bridge. Now, regarding action, I do it as a combination of both measurement and feel, with feel being the final kind of gauge that I use. But basically, I can already tell off the bat, just by feel here, that this action is just a little bit too high with the way that this bridge is currently set. And if I take my Fret Guru XT or my string action gauge, and I'll just show it to you how I usually look at this, okay, is I will usually measure at the 12th fret what the distance between the bottom of the low E string is, okay, just like this, as well as the bottom of what the high E string is in relation to the top of the 12th fret. And what I typically go for is a tiny bit less than 2 millimeters at the low E string. That is a universally accepted low action. So long as you don't have any high frets, usually results in a nice low buzz-free action. Now on the high E string, you can usually get a bit lower than that. And I usually like to set that anywhere between 1.75 millimeters to as low as 1.5, 1.4 sometimes, and that feels good to me. Now, that's not to say that neither of those figures can be a little bit higher. There is no hard and fast rules here, folks. It really just comes down to what feels good to your hand. So I'm just using the Allen key for the stay trem bridge here. I'm going to lower that down, starting first with a visual, because I kind of, by this point, having worked on so many hundreds of these guitars, kind of know what I'm looking for now. I'm just going to then check with my string action gauge to see where I'm at first. And I can see that I am, yep, a little bit less than 2 millimeters there. And then if I look on the high E. Yep, I am right about 1.7 millimeters on the high E from the bottoms of the high and low E to the top of the 12th fret there. And then now we have to retune and check to see if we are getting any buzzing. So we're all in tune now, and now I am just going to check. So I am getting some buzz here. But not really any buzz on the treble strings here. And then if I try to bend, I'm able to clear my bends without choking out here. So my treble strings are good. My bass strings now need a bit of help. Okay, so I am going to go ahead, and I usually, when I'm doing this, I'm going to be raising in just half turns at first. So now, before, to lower it, we were going counterclockwise. This time, to raise it, I need to go clockwise. Okay, so again, I'm just going to go, and it's not buzzing super bad. I could only go a quarter of a turn here, but I'm going to go a full half turn now. Okay, and then just check before we even measure again with our gauge. So now I am no longer buzzing, and the action is still feeling nice and low and very, very comfortable to me overall. If we check one more time with the gauge now, I am still slightly under 2. I am now at about probably 1.85, 1.9 millimeters. So that's definitely why it still feels low to me. And overall, I think this is playing nicely. Okay, so now with that out of the way, we can go ahead and set the intonation of our bridge. And to do that, you ideally would have a strobe tuner. So what you want when you're setting the intonation is for the in tune open note to be the same as your fretted 12th fret note as well as your 12th fret harmonic note. Okay, so taking a look at this, I'm fairly close already. I am seeing, I'm going to go ahead and use my Peterson actually. Slap that on there too. I'm ever so slightly sharp. And when you are sharp on a Mustang bridge, you want to turn the screw clockwise to move that saddle away from the pickups. You want the note to go more flat. And then if you are flat, you move the saddle then closer to the pickups, and that will make it more sharp. So in this case, I can use the same Allen key that I was using before. And sometimes it's as small as, a quarter of a turn. Sometimes it has to be more. In this case, we are pretty close because this bridge actually used to live on my 1962 Jazzmaster. So already it was intonated for a Jazzmaster before. So checking against the 12th fret harmonic now and the fretted note, and I'm good on both fronts. And you basically just repeat that all the way across. So now we're going to move to a different Jazzmaster because while we're on the bridge, we have to talk about radius. So for this next section, we are going to be taking a look at our Foles FJM7 Ultra. Just for demonstration purposes here, I'm going to be swapping the Overpass Goliath bridge that I have here to test out the brand new Foles F4 bridge that I've got, which is a 3-saddle bridge as well. But I haven't actually tested this out on the actual Foles guitar yet, so I'm interested to see how it works. So as a quick bonus, because I am going to guess that a significant amount of you at some point, if you get into offset guitars, are going to want to swap out your bridge. And if you don't necessarily want to change strings or make your work that much harder for you, I'm just going to show you a quick little tip using those capos that I recommend you have at the beginning of the video to swap this bridge out. I'm just putting a capo at the 5th fret, as well as up here at the headstock, mostly on the treble strings, because that prevents those strings from flying off when we finally pull the vibrato on this guy off. And then I'm just going to loosen my strings now about, I'll say, like 11 half turns. And the reason why I count in turns is so I can much more quickly get back to baseline once we have the vibrato back on. I do know that because this is the type of bridge, and in fact, because this overpass bridge does have the Foles little screw for the top, as well as the Foles bridge post, that it could be just as easy if you are swapping bridges out that are compatible with each other. You literally just loosen the strings, remove the little rivets here, right? Unscrew, pull this platform out, and then swap the new one in, and it would be that simple. But we are going to go ahead and pretend like you're installing it for the first time or whatever, and you don't have compatible legs. So I'm just going to show you that process very quickly. Now, if you've got a Jazzmaster that is made out of basswood or poplar, like the Classic Vibe Jazzmasters by Squire, then I highly recommend that if you do use a power drill to uninstall the vibrato, that you do so on the lowest torque setting and take it slow, because if you do it really, really fast, there is the possibility that you are going to wear out those holes even more, especially because those, both basswood and poplar, are soft woods as compared to, say, alder, like on this one. So I don't really have to worry. I've just got it set to the lowest torque setting, and I'm just going to unscrew my vibrato to be able to access our bridge. Okay, just move that aside. And then typically, if you do have something like a Mastery or one of these import Mastery / Hallen kind of clones, what you want to do is to first loosen those little rivets or screws, whatever you want to call these things, grommets, to be able to pull the bridge out. And there you go. And then if you're installing a Mastery bridge or a Foles F3 or F4 bridge, same deal. You want to loosen those little grommets, or if you just have another Mustang bridge or another Jazzmaster bridge, whatever, those drop right in without any additional preparation. So I'm just dropping that in like so, and then retightening. There we go. And a bonus thing that I'm going to tell you at this stage is if you do have a fixed bridge like this, you definitely do not want that bridge sitting as high as, say, a Mustang bridge or a Jazzmaster bridge. And that, again, is because these bridges are not intended to rock back and forth along with these strings. And if these are sitting too high, I'll just go ahead and say too high for me on these kinds of bridges is usually in excess of 4 millimeters, right? 4 millimeters usually is a bit too high. Over 5 millimeters, 6 millimeters, definitely too high for a Mastery bridge, in my personal opinion. Now, the reason why I say that is because I usually find that the strings just feel a little too tight for my personal taste. And I don't even do that many bends and stuff when I play guitar, the way that the style in which I typically play. So if you are someone that does bends, and you're using especially something like 11s or 12s, that is going to make that much harder. So definitely here, we are going to have to lower this bridge to set it up correctly. Now, reinstalling the vibrato here is way easier than just having to restring every string, in my personal opinion. I'm just going to go ahead and loosen these strings another 2 turns just to make this that much easier. So that was about 13 turns that we did total. And then I just pull on the tailpiece here of the vibrato, get those screws ready to kind of thread in by hand at first here. And if it's still too tight, you just want to loosen the strings a little bit more. Okay, and then I'll just drill that in partially. Not all the way yet. Okay, because that just makes it this much easier to pull on this other side. And then once I have that threaded in by hand a bit, I support it still with the other hand, and then I'll drill down. Okay, and I haven't screwed it all the way in because I think This time, just to proceed with caution and to show you all best practices, I'll stop just shy of it hitting the plate and tighten the rest with the manual screwdriver. Again, working with a poplar or basswood body, you definitely want to be going slower than I am right now. Okay, so now we're just going to tighten the rest by hand, and you don't want to crank. As soon as you feel that screw stop, you just stop. That's it, and that's all there is to it. So, going to tune this up again. Once again, now we're tightening about 13 half turns, and you can see, if you take a look here, just how crazy high that action is. That is sitting, that looks like I've got a double bass set up right here. So that bridge is definitely going to have to go down. We're just going to go ahead and drop this bad boy down until we are right about where we were before. Now, with a fixed bridge like this, I typically would want to set this so that it is roughly about, I'd say, anywhere between 1 and 2.5 millimeters tops. And I think we are just right about there right now. We're not decked. I think I can go a tiny bit lower. So yeah, we've got that set fairly decently right now. And the thing with a variable radius bridge, unlike the Mustang bridge that we just worked on, is typically I would do this by first making sure that the base of my bridge is approximately the height that I want it to be. And then I would then check the height of my actual saddle, starting with the low E and the high E side. Now, typically when I am setting whether a bridge like this or whether I am doing a bridge like the traditional or vintage style Jazzmaster bridge like this, I will usually set it to the point where the little set screw to adjust the heights of each one of these saddles is in far enough that it does not protrude from the top. That way I am not going to be cutting my fingers. Usually, if you start off by setting it that way, the other set screws in the rest of the saddles here are not going to protrude either. So with that, I just want to double check, tune up, and then see if this action is fine. And then we will get into the radiusing of these saddles. So with the setup, the way that we have it right now, I'm getting a lot of buzz. So you have two options at this point. You can either raise the bridge base, right, through the set screws in the bridge post, or you can actually raise the saddle. So for me, I think what I'm going to do here is just adjust the low E and high E saddle slots. And I'm just going to go a half turn at first, half turn, and see if that fixes it. So maybe another half turn because I'm still buzzing a little bit. So now I'm no longer buzzing on my outer E strings. So I can now set the radius of our bridge. If you've seen some of my other videos, I will usually use the over the string to dial in very quickly. I just find that to be quicker, and you usually take this, and this one here on our Foles FJM7 Ultra, this has a 9.5 inch radius. So you typically want this to be about 6 millimeters away from the saddles to set it the most accurately. Okay, and then your under the string radius gauge goes more towards like between the pickups here, and you just want to make sure that these strings are making contact with the top of this gauge all the way across. Okay, some people like to try to pluck the string until it's no longer making any sound, until it's muted, right? So if it's making some sound like it is right now, that means that the string is not quite touching. So that's a quick auditory version to test that it's making contact. So let's go ahead and get started. So using our over the string radius gauge at first, I can see right away that our middle saddles are just too high because my outer strings, my low E, high E string, my B string, and even slightly my A string are all not making contact with the bottom of this radius gauge. So I know for sure I have to drop those middle saddles down a bit. And same, we're going to use half turn kind of measurement here, and I'm going counterclockwise to drop that down ever so slightly. And then we will check again. And now it appears I am just about making contact. Almost. I think I have to drop down my A side of this saddle and maybe just ever so slightly. Each one now just about an eighth of a turn on the middle. And also my B needs to come down a tiny bit. Yep. And I can see now that all my strings are making contact with the bottom of that radius gauge. Now I'm going to move to the under the string. Okay. And then again, as a quick test, none of the strings are ringing out cleanly. So I can tell if I look visually, I can see too that all of these strings are making contact with that under the string radius gauge. But from here, if you do see any kind of gap whatsoever, then you just will drop your saddle back just a little bit more. There it is. That's the same exact process that you will do for the original Jazzmaster bridge. A little bit different with a tough set bridge. This is very similar to what you would experience on a Mastery, on a Howland. Virtually any bridge that has adjustable saddles using a set screw like this, you are going to be doing the same exact thing that I just showed you. So it applies to a lot of the aftermarket variable radius bridges that exist out there. And then Intonation goes exactly the same as it did before. This one has a compensated saddle design, so that these slots are compensated. So really, if you've got only a 2 saddle or 3 saddle design on a Mastery like this one, like the Howland, you are just going to try to do your best to dial it in so that your fretted 12th fret as well as your 12th fret harmonics are matching your open strings. And usually these do a fine job. Sometimes you run into issues where you are using maybe like a wound G or something like that, or maybe your string gauges are too thick. One of the reasons why some folks do not mess around with these 2 and 3 saddle bridges is because of intonation issues, but I have never usually had them using strings anywhere from 9 gauge 10s all the way up to 11s. Never had any issues with these compensated saddle type bridges. All right, so we are back with our primary charcoal frost metallic Jazzmaster here. And before we move on to adjusting the truss rod, I just want to go ahead and share with you, because I know some people kind of still want to know exactly how high this bridge is from the pick guard. So this is from the bottom of the base to the pick guard here. So I've got here about 2.54 millimeters on the bass side, and on the treble side here, maybe the slightest bit higher, and that's usually pretty common. I'm getting about 2.8 millimeters on the treble side. Yeah, and it's common to have the bass side sit a little bit lower than the treble side, so don't worry if they're not exactly even. Now, one last thing that I did want to share with you while we are on the topic of bridges, and this here is probably the most offensive bridge in this category for rattles and looseness and whatnot. This came from a Fender Japan Jazzmaster, recent production one. As you can see, some of these screws are already protruding heavily from here. And if you want to be able to actually use this bridge and not have to swap this guy out, all you have to do is apply some of that Loctite 222 to this. And you definitely, especially if you have a nitro finish guitar, you want to get that thing out of the way, because Loctite will totally F up your finish. So I typically, when I'm working with Loctite, like to have like a layer of paper towel or paper or something that is going to prevent the Loctite from seeping into the surface that I'm working on. And this is one of the reasons why when I am working with Loctite, if you are not experienced with it, why I typically prefer to use or apply Loctite using a Q-tip, especially because I've got a huge bottle like this and I'm not concerned about conserving Loctite in this case, right? But now we've got our surface here, and basically all you need to do when you are applying Loctite, if you're applying it freehand, you just don't need to be heavy-handed with this stuff, okay? So if I've got my bottle like this here, you just unclick, okay? And quite literally just one little strip down the side here carefully, and that's really all you're going to need, okay? And then you screw that back in. I'm doing it by hand here. If you want to be wearing gloves, I probably should be wearing gloves as I do this, and it's not going to take long for that to set. Folks had been long recommending Loctite blue, but being even just a little too heavy-handed with that stuff is definitely going to make those little set screws feel stuck. And in particular, these ones up here at the top are so easy to strip. If you already have the blue, I would recommend just getting yourself the purple right off the bat, because nobody wants to be dealing with stripped screws in their bridges, especially if you have an expensive bridge like a Mastery. So same deal with this. I typically will just take this like this with the purple, pop it onto the Allen key like this, because you definitely don't want this getting into the hole where your Allen key goes, and then just a little bit down the side, just like that. Okay? Just like that. And then I typically will just flip the bridge on its side like this, so that I can then easily screw that bad boy in. Sometimes, for some folks, these little springs or these little screws sometimes cause issues too. So in that case, what I typically do from there is to just either fully loosen or fully tighten that saddle first. Okay, like I'm doing here, tightening that saddle, and then I will just very quickly apply a tiny bit of Loctite along the edge there, and then from there I will then fully loosen that screw so that it gets into that threaded hole, and then now I can adjust to where it needs to go. Okay, and there it is. And that is how you Loctite a bridge, my friends. That should help keep those rattles and buzzes and stuff that are coming from your bridge, and also prevent the saddles themselves or the bridge itself from sinking over time, because those set screws stay where you set them. One final note on Loctite. Now, if you have applied way too much Loctite, in this instance, maybe you did use the blue and went a little ham on it. Don't despair if those screws feel stuck. One of the easiest ways to loosen thread locker is to use a soldering iron. So in this case, if one of my little set screws here felt a little bit too tight and I did not want to strip it because it was literally not moving, it should not take too much effort for you to adjust those screws. You basically will just hold your soldering iron to that little set screw, or even the saddle as a whole, but I typically will set it to the little set screw. Sometimes you can kind of smell the Loctite or see a tiny bit of smoke coming up. It's best to have some kind of mask on while you're doing this, because you do not want to be inhaling this stuff. Right? Hold it on for, I don't know, like 30 seconds or so. A minute is usually, if you're soldering iron is already preheated. It shouldn't take long. And then from there, obviously the bridge is going to be hot. It's best to have like a vise or something. You don't really necessarily want to be doing this with this installed in your guitar, but you do have a bit of time to work, but in excess of 30 seconds or a minute or so, if it's still not coming loose, you want to let it cool down first and then pull that bridge out and then put it in a vise or something to be able to work with it safely, or at minimum maybe hold it with like an oven, like oven gloves or an oven mitt or something, so that your hands are protected from the heat. But that should loosen them right up. All right, so I said that we were going to move on to the truss rod next, but actually the thing that I usually do before I move on to the truss rod is to calibrate the vibrato. And this is covering how to calibrate it when you've got a lock button like this here that is featured on most Fender guitars, and also most people upgrade when they're going to upgrade their Squire Jazzmasters, for example, with Fender units that do have the trem lock button. Now, I'm going to be sharing a new approach with you that is fairly new to me. I learned it from my buddy Che Choi over at Lounging Guitars, and I do find his version of this this calibration to be a lot easier to explain at minimum than mine was. So you basically want to start off by engaging the lock, okay? And you know that it's engaged because you can no longer pull up to change the pitch of the vibrato, okay? If you are still able to do that, then you do not have that lock properly engaged. Usually you have to first depress the arm slightly to fully then slide that away from your bridge, and then it shouldn't go up anymore. At this point, you want to retune the guitar back to pitch because likely now it is flat. And the reason why it's flat usually is because before we had maybe too much tension on our tension spring on this vibrato, and also because of the fact that the reason why it goes flat when you engage that trem lock button is because its actual purpose, as Leo Fender and his engineers had designed it, is so that when you break a string on stage, in the recording studio or whatever, and you do not have time to switch guitars in the middle of your set, if you just engage that lock, when you break a string, which makes these strings go sharp, it theoretically will bring the rest of your strings back to pitch, okay? And then so from here, what you are looking for, right, because we've kind of established right now, we most likely have too much tension on this spring. So what you want to do is loosen this to the point where you start to hear kind of a little click, like there's a bit of give then. You're still not going to be able to change the pitch, but you can feel that there is a bit of give, and you can feel that that plate below kind of clicking as you kind of tap on the vibrato arm upwards, okay? So I'm just turning the tension screw here counterclockwise until there is a bit of give. So now, as you can hear, there is a bit of a click here. And theoretically, if you have it set up properly, when you disengage the lock, the tuning should not have changed. Don't change the tuning at all. Make sure that with the lock engaged, that your guitar is still in tune. And then now, what I'm going to do is that now disengage the lock and then check my tuning. So I am ever so slightly flat right now. So I'm going to re-engage the lock and just turn that tension screw again. Just the tiniest bit, like maybe a quarter turn here. Clockwise this time. So now let's check. Again, there should be no change in the tuning between the lock being engaged and disengaged. Yep. So we are perfectly set now. And that is set to our string gauge, which again are 10 to 46 gauge in this instance. And that is how you set the vibrato. Now, I know again, some people want to know how high the collet is with a set of 10 gauge strings. And this is typically what I do. For example, on vibratos that, like the Squier classic vibratos. So from the top of the collet to the base plate of the tremolo, I'm getting roughly about 9.95 millimeters, or in inches, that is 0.391 inches. So not quite even half an inch. So usually from this point, like 0.4, 0.5 inches is usually how I know that the vibrato is set correctly on something like a Squier. That, and usually it's a feel thing. If you're feeling it still going out of tune despite stretching your strings and setting everything else right, that usually means you've either got too much or too little tension on the vibrato. So let's now move on to the truss rod. Now, I know that for a lot of folks out there who aren't used to working on their own guitars, adjusting the truss rod is one of the scariest things. Thinking that you are going to do something that might end up making your truss rod snap. But honestly, you're making such minimal adjustments overall most of the time that you aren't in danger. I think the only spot that you need to really be concerned is if you feel like you have reached the max tightness, for example, on a truss rod. On a truss rod like this that is located at the heel, in which there is a little nut at the very bottom, right? You actually can completely unscrew that thing and remove the nut. Not a lot of folks know that, and you're not going to do any harm at all to the guitar. That is not going to cause your truss rod to snap. Yes, it's going to set the max relief when you completely remove that truss rod nut, but you aren't going to break anything. It's really tightening it that you need to be a little bit more careful, because once you start to get towards the end there where you are hitting maybe the maximum tightness and maybe your neck is still not getting as straight as it could be, if you aren't familiar with how to adjust truss rods at that point, I would seek the help of a certified luthier, guitar tech, etc. So in this case, the only other thing that I do want to say, especially with nitro finish guitars, but it can also happen on poly guitars, is you just got to be careful when you are removing the neck, because it can definitely result in finish flaking off or chipping off, especially right around here at the neck pocket. Okay. Sometimes it's absolutely unavoidable. It is something that I have seen, folks who have brought their guitars to very reputable techs, and it came back to them and there was some finish damage that they unfortunately weren't told about. It happens. One of the ways that you can potentially mitigate that, it is not always a guarantee, but sometimes using just an X-Acto knife blade, if there is enough of a gap between the neck and the neck pocket, to just very, very lightly score along the edge. Again, this is something that usually you leave this to a professional technician if you are not comfortable doing this stuff on your own. But basically, a very thin blade between the edge of the neck pocket here, as well as down here, and the finish on the neck, because over time, and I've seen this time and again on older vintage guitars, and especially the American Vintage 62 and the American Vintage 65 series, the nitro lacquer from the neck bonds to the nitro lacquer on the body, and when the neck has to come off for a truss rod adjustment, then the finish breaks off, right? And again, there's very little that you can do to avoid it, aside from even that kind of scoring along the edge there with a blade is not really going to guarantee that that's not going to happen. You can also potentially get chip out around there if you over tighten the screws in the neck, breaking some of the finish back here around the heel. But I've seen that happen as well, as weird as that sounds. So the very first thing that I want to check is what the current relief of this neck even is. Checking the relief of the neck, usually I do it in seated position, in playing position. Now, most of you out there are most likely not going to have something like a StewMac neck relief gauge like this. This is an expensive tool. It just makes finding the relief that much quicker. So if you do not have one, you just really need a capo and a string action gauge. So with your capo, you want to capo at the first fret, like so. Okay. And then you want to depress the last fret. And then what you're checking with your string action gauge is the gap between the top of the 8th fret and the bottom of your low and high E strings. Okay. And so I'm going to be checking in imperial numbers because the recommendation that Fender has for a 7¼ inch radius neck, and you can check on their website what their recommendations are for other kinds of necks and radii, is 0.010 or 10,000ths of an inch between the top of the 8th fret and the bottom of, say, the low E string here. So if I check here, I am seeing that I definitely have way less than 10,000ths of an inch right now. It almost looks like I have no relief at all. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing on the high E side. And again, I am getting way less. If I were to guess, this is like at 2,000ths, 1 or 2,000ths right now. Because I think this guitar had 11s on it before we changed the strings. That with the 10s and the setup that we have right now, that our neck has no relief at all. Okay. And I can check right now with my StewMac neck relief gauge here. It should be able to tell me exactly how much relief I have. Just about. And yeah, this neck has zero relief, dead straight, which is why, despite my bridge being set properly, that if I dig in, I am getting some buzz right now. Mostly on the low E, not as bad. So that tells me that we can start off with a minimal adjustment here to loosen that truss rod a bit to add more relief. And that is when the neck is bowing away from the strings. Okay. And when your neck has too much relief, let's say you went to go measure just the way that I showed you just now, and instead of getting less than 10,000ths, you were getting something like 20,000ths or 30,000ths. And for our metric friends, that is, something like a full millimeter or 2 millimeters of relief. Then you know that your neck is bowing too far away from the strings. And then you're going to have to tighten that truss rod. You're going to have to adjust that little nut to go clockwise instead of loosen and go counterclockwise. So let's go ahead and get this done. Ideally, I know that with this neck that my frets on this are fairly level for the most part. And that in the past, I've been able to get away with as little as, say, 5,000ths of an inch of relief. Okay. So we're going to shoot for that number again. But again, to be on the safe side, if you want to minimize the amount of buzz, you can go with Fender's recommended amount of 10,000ths. But for me, usually on a guitar where the height of the frets overall is pretty level across the board, I can usually get away with anywhere between 7,000ths, 5,000ths, so sometimes even a tiny bit less. I feel like this guitar in the past has been 4 or 5,000ths max, and I was still able to get buzz-free action. And for me personally, I do like as straight of a neck as I can get without buzzing. In fact, the buzzing here is not even that bad. I could rock this and be totally fine with it. But for the purposes of today's video, I'm going to show you how we adjust the truss rod. So once again, our capo is going at the 5th fret and our headstock. Okay. And now this time I'm only going to loosen the strings about 6 half turns. Now, if you don't have a little tool like this one, which is a little truss rod crank for vintage style heel adjusted truss rods. Right, and this one here is from StewMac. I think Hosco makes one. You can get generic ones. If you don't have one of those, I typically like to switch the bit on my ratcheting screwdriver to a flathead bit. It just helps to not strip the Phillips head screw that is at the bottom of this heel. So I will swap that out, and I'll show you how to use both of these once we have the neck off. If you have a truss rod crank like this, usually it's enough to kind of loosen or back up the screws to the point where they are not fully out of the neck, allowing you to just pull the neck up slightly and make the adjustment that you need. But I do find that that is a little bit more precarious in my experience. If you are not able to keep a steady hold of the neck while doing that, any kind of instability with your neck, especially around a neck pocket that has been finished in a thin nitro finish like this one here, has the potential, if you accidentally crank the neck to the right or to the left, has the potential to result in finish damage around there, which is why I typically like to, once I've completely unbolted the neck or unscrewed the neck, that I typically like to lift straight up and out of that neck pocket and put the neck aside away from hitting the body at all when I am making those adjustments. All right, so from here, grab our drill, and then I just usually sit the guitar in my lap like this, supporting both the neck as well as the body by gripping it like this here. Okay, I find that that is usually the most secure way to do this. And then again, on the lowest torque setting here, unscrewing the neck. And then I'm going to continue to support that neck heel and my neck, just holding it like so as it drops down to the table. And then very carefully now, I am going to go ahead and lift this straight out of the neck pocket. Okay, and then thankfully didn't get any damage on the paint surrounding. Okay, and because we are dead flat right now, and I know that I could get away with probably about 0.005 of an inch, typically when I make adjustments, I will do a quarter turn on the little nut at the bottom of this here. So as you can see there, it's a Phillips head nut. And to bring a bit of relief to this, I typically will want to turn about a quarter turn as I turn counterclockwise here, right? But because I don't need that much of an adjustment, I think I'm going to do maybe about 1/8 of a turn instead, or maybe like a 1/6, right? Just to get a bit of relief into there like that. Just about there is where we are going to leave it. Okay. Same thing. If you are using the truss rod crank there, for example, if you have one of these, you can use it. Some people find it easier to control. Same deal. Okay. So now we're going to pop this thing back on again, carefully, the same way we went in, making sure that it is clearing on both sides as we go to seat it, to try to do our best to avoid finish damage here. And I'm just easing it in like so. And then when I feel that it's in that pocket, I can then relift the body here. Okay. And then we can screw this neck back in, just to show you very quickly what I was talking about with the finish. Okay. You can see at the edge of the heel there, right, that the paint indeed did bond with the nitro lacquer on the neck. We're just lucky that we didn't end up with a chip out around there. This time around, as I tighten the screws on the neck, I am going to go until I'm just shy of being flush with the neck plate here. And I'm going to tighten the rest by hand, because again, there is a danger if you wait for this thing to kick back. There's a danger that you will get some chip out around the neck pocket, and then tighten the rest by hand. And again, stopping, no need to crank here. Once I feel the screw kind of stop, I stop. There's no need to crank to over tighten at this point. So, okay, I'm done. Then now we're going to tune back up. So now, I am not getting the buzzing that I was getting before. Let's go ahead and check to see how much relief we have. This time I'm going to do it the easy way with the StewMac relief gauge, since I showed you before how to do it the manual way. And now I am getting roughly about 6 thousandths of an inch of relief. So that is good. That is kind of what I was able to hit before. It was actually between 5 and 6 thousandths. So this feels really, really nice to me. Now, another thing, once you've got it set up, now I don't have a danger here of my strings being too close to the edge of the fretboard, because the stay trim here has a 52 millimeter string spacing to keep your outer E strings away from the edge of the fretboard. But if you find that your neck is not seated properly, maybe your bass strings are too close to the edge, or your treble strings are too close to the edge, all you really have to do is crank your neck. So for example, if your treble strings are too close to slipping off the edge on yours, you want to kind of crank your neck upwards towards you, right? For that string to kind of sit a little bit further in. And for you to do that, I typically will support the body like this and have it kind of pressed up against my sternum like this. And then I will literally take the neck, usually right around here between the 4th and 5th frets, and just pull and crank the neck upwards towards me. And I can see right now that the high E string is now sitting a bit further away from the edge of the neck. I didn't need that. So if you have the opposite problem, where maybe your bass string is a little bit too close to the edge, then you want to crank it downwards. And similarly, I will support the neck, this time holding on to the upper horn, and then I will just crank the neck a bit downwards. Okay? And then that now brings the low E string a bit further from the edge. I need to now have it be somewhere in the middle. So I'm just supporting it against my body like this and looking visually to see that the strings are now approximately back to the center, and they now are. Okay, when you do that, you definitely are going to have to retune, because that is going to, depending on the direction that you're pulling in, that is going to pull your strings either flat or sharp. So that is how to reseat your neck if you need to. I know that not everybody has the kind of guitar where the truss rod adjustment is at the heel. So if you have something like this Foles FJM7 Ultra or a Squire or any one of the like modern Fenders, they all have the truss rod adjustment up here. And the principle is basically the same as what we discussed when it comes to adjusting the truss rod from the heel. But this time, instead of using a screwdriver, you are going to have to use an Allen key. And so for this particular neck here, if you need to make an adjustment so that you have less relief in the neck, you need to go counterclockwise. So that's going to be away from you. And then if you need to have less relief, then you want to pull it towards you. Okay. And that's basically it when it comes to adjusting the truss rod on a headstock adjustment kind like this one. Okay, my friends, the next thing that we're going to do now that our setup is pretty dialed in is we're going to stretch our strings. Stretching strings it's fairly easy. All you have to do is get your fingers underneath, okay, and then pull up, okay, and then retune after you're done. And then you keep doing this until the point where you can stretch the strings and it's no longer going out of tune. So that was one revolution. I find that with these Gabriel Tenorio String Company strings, I actually don't need to stretch as much as I do with standard off-the-shelf strings. And I am not lying. It's kind of crazy. That was something that I noticed right off the bat. Even our B and E here barely had to be tuned at all, even after that stretching. And when you are tuning, this is something that I tell folks in case you do not know, you never want to tune down to pitch. You always want to tune up to pitch. So if you went a little bit too far, you want to tune back down and then tune back up until you are in pitch. The reason why is because when you tune down, you create a bit of slack in the string, which causes, the perfect conditions for tuning instability. So there's just a little fun fact and pointer for you there. Okay, one more time. And I think we should be good. Yep, and I am perfectly in tune. And I'm going to flip now the guitar just a tiny bit to show you what to look for in case, even after this setup so far, in case you're still going out of tune. One of the very likely culprits is that you are getting some binding in your nut slots. This is especially common if you have stepped up in string gauge from what came on the guitar stock. So for example, if the guitar came with 9s and you went up to 11s, then you most likely have nut slots that are too narrow. The nut slot is now kind of gripping onto the string rather than letting it pass through, especially when you are using the vibrato. And then the other very common nut issues is if you were getting a sitar-like sound, that is usually because you have a nut slot that is cut too straight. Usually you want the nut slot to be cut at an angle down towards the tuners. Okay, so if you were getting a sitar-like sound, then that is one of the things that you will have to do. And if you do not have professional nut slotting files, I like these ones from Music Nomad here. These have been my go-to for a while now. Then you will most likely need to bring it to a guitar tech to sort that out. Another issue that you will run into with nut is that if you are playing an open string and that string is buzzing, that is usually the result of the nut slot being cut too low. Okay, and that's happening because there quite literally is not enough clearance usually between your nut slot and even the first fret here. And so when you pluck the string, it is vibrating against one or more frets. So those are some common nut issues, but with regards to binding, I typically will just do a quick check. And if you can easily lift the strings out of the nut slot and not get a kind of pinging or kind of feel it catching in the nut slot, then you are usually good. Okay. So in this instance here, I wasn't getting anything. There was that one pinging sound that I got, but that was really from me accidentally letting go of the string. But I can lift all of the strings cleanly here and not get the sound of catching against the edge of the nut slots here. So, but that is what it sounds like. So if you are getting that consistently, that little ping sound, and I'm going to replicate this by kind of pulling the string against the edge of the nut slot. But if you're getting that kind of sound constantly when you're pulling up and down, now if I pull that up cleanly, right, I don't get that sound. But if you're getting that every single time you try to lift up the string, then that usually means that the nut slot is catching and that string is then binding inside of that narrow nut slot. Okay, so for us here, we are good. We do not have any nut slots binding. And again, if you have nut slotting files and maybe don't really know your way around them, the thing that you would want to do here is definitely mask off behind the nut. I typically will use just a layer of like painter's tape. And then on top of that, I will use some of my like 400 grit adhesive sandpaper behind, because that is thick enough that if I maybe angle a little bit too much downwards, right? And if I slightly kiss the edge of that sandpaper that's blocking this rosewood behind the nut, then I am not going to end up marring up or cutting into my headstock or my neck here, right? So you definitely want to protect that area. Another trick sometimes I do is I will take like the 16,000th, which is very, very thin, and I sometimes will have that just block the back edge here while I use the nut slotting file to cut towards the back if you need more of an angle or if you need more depth or what have you. So that is just a little trick there. Now, the last thing that I did want to mention regarding nut slot depth, when it comes to the bass strings on a Jazzmaster, we'll typically go with 20,000ths of an inch between the bottom of the string and the top of the first fret. It's universally accepted by most luthiers and guitar techs out there that this is a good, safe number that's going to feel good and is not so shallow that you're going to be pinching sharp in your open chords or cowboy chord area here, the E, A, and D. And then about anywhere between 15 and I'd say 17 or 18 thousandths for the treble strings here. And the easiest way to measure that is with your feeler gauges, right? So for example, if I go underneath here and I'm touching underneath without moving the string, I've got a little bit more space than 16 thousandths of an inch. Right? So then you just move up until you get to that point, and then that way you can see exactly how much room you've got there. And again, depending on how low your frets are, on the size of your frets, which you can easily check with a set of calipers, that will determine how deep that slot can be overall. The other quick method to check whether a nut slot is an appropriate height or whether it is too low is by just depressing the third fret, and you're listening for like a little ping here, right? And if you do not hear that, I don't know if you're going to be able to hear, but if you hear no sound at all when you're tapping, and I'm hearing it across the board here, right? All the strings across the board here were making a little pinging sound, right? If you hear nothing at all, then that means that your nut slot is cut too low. There is one other thing that we have to do, which is to set the pickup heights on this guy now. So let's go ahead and plug this bad boy in and see where we're at. And I can tell you how I usually like to set up the pickups. All right, so we are all plugged in now to our Princeton Reverb reissue. And basically the way that I like to set pickups is by first setting them to the point on which I can hear them oscillating when depressing the 12th fret on both the high E and the low E. And then once I find that point, I will then lower them until they are no longer oscillating, and that lets me know kind of what the max height is. And I personally like to have the most volume possible that I can get from my pickups. Obviously, you can dial them into taste. For some folks, that max height is just a little bit too bright. There is just too much attack. It sounds too aggressive to them, and you can tone that down a bit by lowering your pickups a bit more further away from the strings. But for me, that is my typical approach in finding them. And so we're going to start off, and I typically start off with my bridge pickup. So we're going to just start here. So I'm not sure if you can hear that, but oscillation, basically, it almost sounds kind of like a tremolo, like a wong, 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 wong kind of sound. And when I pluck the E string, the low E string here at the 12th fret, I'm not really getting it. So I'm going to go ahead and raise the bass side just a tiny bit, okay, to see. And it's already pretty high right now. So, and I think now you can hear it. It's kind of undulating a bit. So from that point, if we raise it up even more, you will hear it even more dramatically. Okay, then this is, I think, the max height my pickup can go up here. So you can hear that the note is not like stable, right? It's almost like it's got a very light, slow tremolo going on right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and lower that down. And I'm just lowering 2 half turns until I do not hear that anymore. Lowering about another half turn on each side. Just a little bit more. And that sounds a bit more stable to me on that side. We're going to do the same thing with the high E here. I felt like I could hear it a tiny bit maybe, but we'll check again. I'm just going to raise it for effect here so that you can definitely hear the oscillations. So with the pickup set that high, you should be able to hear it here. Do you hear that kind of waviness to the sound? So we want to dial that back down, and I'm just doing about 3 half turns, get it down kind of even with how I have it set up on the bass side here. And I'm not really hearing it anymore. Again, that is subjective. Maybe some of you can hear it, but I can no longer hear what I was hearing before. So that is a good height for me on the bridge pickup. And then now what I'm going to do from there is to then dial in the overall volume of the neck pickup based on how loud the bridge pickup is. So here we go with the bridge pickup. So I'm going to check my neck pickup now. That's pretty good. Let's try the middle. So we're just going to check the neck pickup right now to make sure that we are not oscillating on the neck pickup at all, because the volume sounds almost even to me, but I feel like I was slightly hearing oscillations when we were playing with both pickups on and slightly on the neck pickup. So we're going to start with the bass side again. I feel like I'm hearing slight oscillation there. I feel like I'm not hearing it anymore. Maybe just the tiniest bit lower. And I'm not hearing it anymore. Let's try that one more time. Bridge again. Both pickups together. And a neck pickup. So if the neck pickup sounds a little bit too dark to you, because maybe your pickup's a little bit too far, you can adjust now to taste. You just don't want to be so kind of in that oscillation zone because the closer your magnets are to the strings, the more they will be pulling on those strings. So if you're having a hard time, for example, properly intonating when you are intonating your bridge, one of the first things that you should check, especially if it looks weird, like maybe one of your saddles is already sitting as far back or as far forward as it can, and you're still not able to intonate, one of the main culprits when that's happening is that your pickups are too high and the magnets are literally pulling on these strings. So I want to bring a little bit of liveliness back to our neck pickup here. So I'm just raising it ever so slightly. Ever so slightly. So we're going to check now. All right. Sounds good to me. Awesome. So I don't typically share the pickup height with folks because, again, this is one of those things where folks will usually fixate on numbers rather than actually listening, which listening is the more important thing to do here, okay? Because you might not be getting the best sound. No two pickups, even if they are coming from the same batch, even if they're coming from the same maker, no two pickups are exactly the same, right? So every pickup is going to sound slightly different, and that is why you want to listen more rather than fixate on any number that guitar tech or YouTuber or Instagram influencer or anybody is going to tell you. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to go ahead and use my calipers again. I am getting roughly about 0.24 inches or 6.2 millimeters on the bass side of the bridge pickup, and then on the treble side, I'm going to go from the middle here. Treble side, I am getting about 6.69 millimeters or 0.264 inches. Okay, and then on the bass side here, I am getting 0.171 inches or 4.36 millimeters. At the treble side, I am getting 0.207 inches or 5.27 millimeters. Just to lightly touch on a couple of common things during the setup that you might experience. The very first thing is the tremolo. If you're getting squeaking or looseness here with your vibrato, basically what you want to do is first go ahead and engage that lock, pull that out, okay? And you want to put a bit of a bend or a kink at the end of your vibrato arm. And so that is most easily accomplished if you've got something like a vise, like a tabletop vise. This one is one from StewMac that you literally can hold down, put in here, and then kind of just grip it inside. I usually will use pieces of leather like this to protect the finish of the metal here, and then I will just sandwich that inside and then basically just crank upwards just a very, very tiny bit, and that usually is enough to put a little bit of an end in the arm. And then before I put it back inside, I will give it a little dip inside of the old Vaseline and then pop that back in, and that usually is enough to solve the looseness, but also solve any kind of squeaking and such that you may be getting from the tremolo arm. So in this case, I'm not experiencing that at all. It feels nice and smooth and fluid while not being super loose. Now, continuing with our vibrato arm, if you find that your vibrato arm is just too short, right? One of the things that you can do to help it feel longer is by, and this is another trick, thank you, Che, at Lounging Guitars that taught me this one, because the vibrato arms, as of, I'd say at minimum, the past 6 years or so, have been shorter than they historically had been, by as much as an inch, or maybe even a little bit more than that. One of the tricks to get your arm to be even longer is by unscrewing the little tip here. If it's a screw-in type, if it is just a push-on type, you can just pull it off. Anyway, you'll use a super glue like this one here. This is the one that Che used on his channel, and I like this super glue a lot because you squeeze the little ends here for the glue to release, and there's a lot of control. And I typically will just put a tiny bit of glue on the inside of the little trem arm tip here, and then I will basically just rest it on top of where the threads, up to where the threads end. Okay, so you can see that if you screw it down all the way, right, that you are getting, by doing that, you're getting at least, I'd say almost an inch more length in your vibrato arm. So that is another little tip. If you are experiencing crackles and things with your electronics, most notably, that usually happens on your switches as well as your pots. It doesn't mean that they're faulty. It usually just needs some contact cleaner. So historically, I use Deoxit D5, but I was trying out this WD-40 Specialist contact cleaner. I find that it works almost as good. I haven't had any issues with this, but typically for a switch like this here, you will just spray from the top just a little bit and then wiggle, okay, back and forth, and that should help with the crackles on that thing. Now, if you are having crackles on your volume or tone knobs, whether it be in your lead circuit or your rhythm circuit here, when you pull up the pick guard, you basically just want to make sure to get the Deoxit or the contact cleaner inside of that slot, the open little slot there, right, in the casing of the pot. So if I were doing this one, I would just hold it like this, spray in just a bit, and then immediately after, you want to turn the shaft of that pot, right? And that gets the contact cleaner moving inside, and that should get rid of most of the crackles that you were getting from there. Same deal with the mini pots that are up here. So same thing, that slot is just a tiny bit smaller. So if I were doing this one, just go in from the top here, just like this, spray, and then twist that pot, and then you're good to go. Now, even after doing all of that, your setup might still not be perfect. And one of the biggest culprits that you are going to run into, one of the limitations, for example, for why you can't set your action to be even lower without getting fret buzz, despite following all of those steps that I just covered, is because likely you have got high frets. And the quickest way for you to be able to check that you have high frets is by using a fret rocker. So again, we've got our Fret Guru XT here, and basically you're just using the fret rocker to ride 3 frets and seeing if it seesaws effectively. And when you have a high fret, you will hear this clicking sound. Ideally, when you are doing this, you want your neck to be straight, so zeroed out. You can check that using that method that we did before. So for example, here I found at our 3rd fret, right along the G here, that I have got a high spot on the fret. Now, if you have a fret hammer, and I do want to caution you folks on this, but if you have a fret hammer and just lightly tap, sometimes that is enough to reseat that fret. Do not go ham with this, despite the fact that this is brass. If you hit this too hard, particularly while the neck is installed still on your guitar, there is a chance that you might end up cracking either the fretboard or the wood. So I advise you to use a lot of caution. But even if light taps with the fret hammer are not enough to get those frets level, you do have a few options. One of those options is using something like the StewMac fret kisser here, which is basically like a fret rocker, but it's got an abrasive underneath, and you basically will rub it back and forth like this, or side to side like this, until you no longer feel that it is grinding away material. You are still going to have to crown then, so you'll need a crowning file to re-crown that flat spot that you made, and then you're going to need to repolish. So again, even for some more experienced folks, that might be a bit too much to deal with, and something that you might be better off trusting a certified or an experienced guitar tech to do for you instead. Definitely not something I would advise someone who's beginner level to try out, especially on an expensive guitar. So the more high frets you end up finding, the more areas where you likely are going to be experiencing some buzz, and that can also be mitigated by just raising the action up ever so slightly, and then that might make the buzz go away. But if your action still feels way too high and you're still unable to get rid of that buzz, then yeah, the most likely culprit, aside from something like a twisted or warped neck, is most likely some high frets. All right, now one very final thing that I usually do in a setup is to take the guitar like this, and I'm going to take my screwdriver and just loosen the screws here, maybe about a half turn or so. And then after doing that, we're just going to retighten them. And I just find that this helps the neck to seat properly, and also results in just an overall more lively and resonant guitar after the setup is done. And so from here, just gonna retune, and then you are all done. So if you ended up following all of those steps and now your Jazzmaster plays better than it ever has, then congrats, you just did a master setup on your Jazzmaster. And that deserves a round of applause, a pat on the back. You should be proud of yourselves, because not everybody has the constitution to do this on their own. And with that, that's going to do it for this video, folks. I hope you found it enjoyable as well as informative, especially if you've been wondering how to set up your Jazzmaster properly. Let me know down in the comments what you all thought of this, and especially if you thought that I missed anything, if you have your own tips and tricks that have been working for you on setting up your Jazzmasters. I really love hearing and learning new things from you all. So if you leave a comment down below, I know I and the rest of the folks watching this video would definitely appreciate it. If you haven't already, please hit that like and subscribe button, as well as the notification bell, to be notified of new videos as soon as they drop. And don't forget to follow Totally Wired Guitars for more offset guitars setup tips.